So I'm Mira Nisim. This is Montessori Essentials. We're having a Montessori moment with Laura Flores Shaw out of California. I met Laura at the AMI refresher course and was very impressed with her project, the Montessori Whitepapers, and asked Laura to come and speak to me about your project. So Laura, would you like to talk a little about your process here?
Sure. So let's see. I'm going to kind of start at the very beginning, if you don't
Yeah.
mind. But I came to Montessori through my children, which a lot of people do. And actually, I learned about Montessori in my master's program, in my marriage and family therapy program, and became very interested for my own children and who were toddlers at the time. And I went to look at a local Montessori school, and the woman who showed me around actually was a marriage and family therapist, but was now working at the school. And she came to Montessori because she saw there was a lot of alignment between the literature on optimal parenting and what Montessori does in the classroom. So we had this great connection. I put my children in the school, the whole thing. And then through a series of circumstances, I came actually to become the head of that school. That was not something that I planned on, but basically, once I got through the end of my internship year doing therapy in a local public school district in elementary and in adolescence, I really felt like Montessori was prevention, where you don't need a lot of intervention. It's a very therapeutic environment in and of itself.
Oh, yeah.
And whereas I was treating children who were in third grade and depressed, and I thought, well, this is ridiculous. So due to the circumstances at the school, I came to take it over. I'm not Montessori trained, but really felt that my job as a head of school was to support my teachers in their practice. We went through the process of getting the school AMI recognized, that sort of thing. I had some really great teachers who I learned from constantly. When I took over the school, it was in dire straits, not doing very well, didn't have a good reputation. So we did a lot of parent education. And the way that I did that parent education was through the lens of the research literature based on my knowledge from my master's program. And that really seemed to work well with the community. And also it helped. It was a framework through which I saw Montessori as well. So really, I really enjoyed putting those educationals together. The parents really responded to it. We had a lot of Caltech, JPL parents, in addition to, we're outside of LA. So we had a lot of Hollywood people as well. But, all of the parents really responded to that. And I really felt like I was in a unique position because I'd had this exposure to the literature and wished that I could kind of share that with other heads of schools to help them to explain Montessori to parents in a way that's not just like, well, we do this just because Dr. Montessori said so. A lot of the research came after, after what Dr. Montessori figured out through her systematic observation of children.
Yeah.
And so, I did my time at the school, and my children thrived there for many years, and we built a middle school and built up the elementary. And I was ready for a new challenge, so I started a doctorate program at Johns Hopkins, a doctorate in education specializing in mind, brain, and teaching, which was perfect because it's a great program where, it's not just about school administration, which a lot of doctorates in education are, but it's really about looking at the cognitive science and looking at neuroscience and seeing what can be translated into classroom practice. And that went along really well with my neuroscience background that I had actually through undergrad. So I did neuroscience research for about 18 months in a graduate lab there, and that was an amazing experience. So I've always had this interest in the brain and learning. And so as I was in that doctorate program, I'm reading these articles every week about, this is what we recommend, for children in the classroom. They need to learn how to be self-regulated in their learning, and they need this and they need that. And all of these articles I'm reading, and I'm thinking, okay, we do that in Montessori. We do these things. Right. And then, I went through the first year of the program, and halfway through the first semester of my second year, I came up with this idea of writing white papers that correlate Montessori practice with research. And it's basically, I mean, what Angeline Lillard did in her book, The Science Behind the Genius, right? But as much as I love that book, and any nerdy person loves that book, it's dense. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
And so how can we convey what the research is telling us and correlate that with what we do in Montessori practice in a way that's really digestible? It's like these little snacks that you're giving to parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not using a lot of jargon either on the science side, and you're not using a lot of jargon on the Montessori side. So it's sort of translating both and merging them and making them just accessible to all parents as well as the teachers themselves, because I think it's helpful for them to have some of the knowledge about the science behind their practice, so that when they're talking with parents, they can have other explanations as to why we may do something. So that's basically, I look at the Montessori white papers as a parent education tool, but it's also a teacher education tool. So for the parents, it's teaching them about the science behind Montessori. It's giving them third-party validation, because even when parents, they love Montessori and they see what it does for their children, it can still be anxiety-provoking to have your children in a Montessori school because the people around you don't have their children in a Montessori school. So, you go home I would have parents that would go home for Christmas breaks and that kind of thing, and they would come back and go, I just got all these questions from my family members and I didn't know how to answer them. And these white papers are a way to kind of address those questions. So it can arm the parents, and they know they're making the right choice, but everybody questions it. But now it can arm them with information so that they can provide that information when people are questioning them, and they can feel, they can feel more secure in their choice, because they're making a really good choice for their children.
Definitely. I love that. It's such a great idea. And you're right. Like there's a lot of literature written by Dr. Montessori, and that Science Behind the Genius, it definitely is a dense book. And I think it's very rare that the parents are actually educating themselves on the philosophy. It's kind of like parents will see something written that says that it's it's a great academic program, or that their children are coming out with great success, or they'll see who came out of Montessori, like the founders of Google, and they go, okay, perfect, let's just send them there. But then when they don't get actual works coming back from the classroom, it's not like in typical preschools where you're getting all these little arts and crafts things coming home. We're not doing that in Montessori. It's all child-centered. So we're not forcing them to make things. Parents don't always know what they're actually getting. And I think it's so important to give tools to parents to educate them on what's actually happening in the classroom. And I love what you said about doing more parent education and giving them the background, because that's really how you're going to have parents stay in the school, support their children through the school. I think also it gives a lot better idea of what parents can do at home to support their children, and their teachers are going to get more support, because the parents aren't going, why isn't my child reading yet? Why isn't my child writing yet? What's going on here? And we can kind of get a support for the pedagogy, because also the 3-year cycle of letting the child go at his or her own pace, it requires a lot of trust. And if the parents don't know what's the idea behind it, they might get very skeptical or pull them out early. And then they might not be getting the best education for their children, because they weren't at the point yet where they were ready to show their skills. They were still in the observation phase. And I think it's so important for parents to know what's going on.
Yeah, that trust that is it's so key, because I think, parenting is one of the hardest things we can do, right? I mean, you want what's best for your child, and you want to ensure that you're making choices that are putting your child on a path to success. And it's sometimes it's, and I've heard parents say it is more comforting to get grades and to have them take tests, because then they feel like they know their children are learning.
Right.
But those things are actually really deceptive, because the level of forgetting is extraordinarily high.
Yeah.
And just because you did well on a test doesn't mean that you're going to remember what was on that test come 3 months from now, let alone 3 years from now.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that for a lot of parents, Montessori can feel like almost a faith, because we're also telling them you need to trust your child, because we do trust that children are going to get to where they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're talking about personalized learning, that means that they're not all going to get there at exactly the same time.
Right.
And then children have different work at different times. Sometimes their work is really just the self-regulation piece so that they can learn content. And then sometimes it's like, well, they've got this self-regulation piece in this one area down really well. And so now we're going to, that child is now focusing on this content or this particular skill, maybe, writing or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But their work changes. And that's the thing too, is that Montessori, it gives them all of that space. So we're looking at the child with a longer view in mind. Whereas in a conventional environment, it's much more of a short-term perspective. It's that grade that you got on that homework assignment that night, kind of thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a different measurement of success. This week we had a ladies' night, so there's been a gentleman's night and a ladies' night at the elementary level here at the Montessori school that my children go to, and the whatever female or male role models in the children's lives are invited into the classroom for an hour, and the child guides the parent or the adult, showing them what they're working on, showing them around the classroom, showing them what they're excited to work on next. And it was a great opportunity to speak to the teacher and to see the class and just to see the light in the children's eyes when they're saying, look what I'm doing. And I just love when that's available to parents to see. And it only happens once a year, but it's a really exciting experience to actually get that glimpse of what's happening in the class, because you're not getting those grades. And also, I've talked to many of the educators about how they motivate the children, because they also kind of want to be competitive. It's natural that they want some competition, but there's no grade competition. And so it's really neat to kind of see how they motivate. Oh, I'm on the A series of cards on Mad Minutes, or this math program, or I've already moved on to this cabinet, and they find ways where they're motivated, but it's all through the education. And that's really exciting to see, and exciting for the parents to get a glimpse of as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, that desire to learn, we, that's something we always talk about in education. Oh, we need to foster a love of learning, and it becomes such a cliche that it almost becomes meaningless to a certain extent.
Right.
But it's actually so important, particularly now, given the kind of economy and society that we have now. Change is exponential. It used to be that society didn't change for thousands of years, right? People knew their place, they knew their role, they knew what they were supposed to do. And now that is just not the case anymore. And as more jobs become automated, or jobs become obsolete in some areas, or as industries change, and we're seeing industries change before our eyes now, the children are going to grow up in an environment where they're going to be required to reinvent themselves, or learn something new, and take on a different profession, or take on a whole different industry. So that level of learning really needs to be there. Right. And it can't just be the perspective of, okay, wait, so what hoop do I have to jump through now? Okay, so because when they get focused on the hoops, okay, I got to take this test to get into this place, to go to this school, to then go to this grad school. They're focused on hoops, and then they're not focused on really, the content, or even the choice that they're making, right? So a million years ago, I used to do attorney recruiting for what was then at the time the largest firm in the world. And I would get these calls all the time from these undergraduates who decided that they wanted to go to law school. And so they would call, and they were doing their due diligence, right? They're doing their research, and they want to know, okay, what law school do I need to go to get a job in your firm? And
Right.
my first question was always, do you know any lawyers? And they'd go, what? Well, is anybody in your family a lawyer? And some, a lot of times we, no, not. And okay, so have you worked in a law firm? No. Okay, well, how do you know you want to go to law school? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, do yourself a favor, go work in a firm, go see what it's all about, and then make the decision before you invest $100,000, thinking that you're just, but see, that's just a track. Like they're thinking in terms of hoops and a track.
Right.
You're not thinking in terms of these more substantive questions. Like, what is the actual lifestyle, the kind of, that I'm going to get into?
Right.
What does the work involve? What is that going to, do I really want to do that every day? That kind of thing. And so we're still kind of stuck in that very kind of what's the track mentality. And then we're losing, and frankly, I mean, I think that leads to, midlife crises later on, because you haven't really made a very conscious choice. You've just done what, you've taken a track to a road to success, what you think is quote unquote success. But now those tracks don't even exist anymore.
Exactly.
Okay. So now, so we not only, we have to make sure that we're really fostering that love of learning in children.
I mean, I graduated in the year 2000 from high school, and it was very exciting. We're the first graduating class of the millennium, and where everyone is kind of looking to us, okay, what are the millennials going to do? What are they going to do? We all went to college, or most of us from my graduating class, and we all get out. There's no jobs. What do? Suddenly it's okay. It's not enough to get a degree anymore. It doesn't guarantee you a job. People see your degree, but they know you have no experience. Like you said, you don't know the lifestyle, you don't know what's expected in that position. A lot of my classmates went back to live with their parents. They started working in coffee shops. They decided to either, a lot of them went back and did masters, or even higher to defer their student loans and to get more loans and buy themselves more time to decide what to do. So a lot of my friends got really well educated, and then they come out from the next degree and they still don't know what to do for work. And what I think is happening a lot more is now you really kind of need to be an entrepreneur or partner with other people who have those skills. And it's not even about the degree. It's about your confidence of your problem solving skills and your executive functioning and your ability to think outside the box and go create a job where there wasn't one. Go find a need where you didn't know that it existed. And I think that's what's great about Montessori is they really focus on those skills. How to organize your day, how to schedule yourself, how to meet your own needs, how to be in a social environment. And those are really what I think the economy is going to need from the future adults who are going to come out and create jobs and businesses. And it's something that love of learning that you're talking about really comes into play, because if someone's going to go and create their own business, they certainly need to like the learning curve that's involved.
Right.
They need to like, oh, I need, I'm also starting my own business with using my Montessori background, and I'm starting to make online courses. And I had to go figure out how to make an online course and how to make a website. And now I need to market myself and learn all these things. There's so many skills that it wasn't enough to just know the content. Now you need to know how to deliver it and how to get it to reach other people. And it's an exciting process, but you definitely have to want to do that process and be interested enough to go for it. So I think
that's so true.
Yeah, that early childhood education preparing you that you can do hard work and you can do challenging things, and to have the confidence to do it is so key.
Yeah.
I would love to see people shift their idea of schooling. I think it's been shown more in YouTube. I love the like Montessori Madness videos and TED Talks. I see a lot of outside the box thinking and reinvestigating school. I love your mission from your website on having people rethink schooling. And I just think it's so important that we keep investigating that, and that we actually make conscious choices of what we're doing when the children are constructing their personalities. How are we going to do that at home and at school? What kind of education will actually create the adult that is going to lead the new society?
Well, and that's why, I mean, we really need a paradigm shift. And that shift takes time. So again, that's another reason for the white papers, because in my experience too, in running the school, I had some parents who had been at the school longer than I had. And every now and again, they would ask me questions and I would realize, oh, wow, you're still looking at this through the lens of conventional education, right? Because that's what most of us experience. That is, as these two education researchers, Tyak and Cuban, say, that it's the grammar of schooling that we are all attached to, right? So we think of school, and then we think of children sitting at desks and a teacher at the head, and all the children are the same age essentially. And this is school, right? And in my doctorate program, I was the only, quote unquote, alternative educator, and you didn't see a lot of people questioning this very basic structure, this framework.
Right.
And what you see a lot of times, and what we've seen in education reform, is that they take bits and pieces of something. Maybe it's progressive education or something else, or bits and pieces even of military thought on how they think learning occurs, whatever.
Right.
And they stuff it into this conventional framework. Mm-hmm. And what is not talked about is how the framework itself, this grammar of schooling, actually drives the behavior of everybody in it. And it's also in a very kind of modular, mechanistic perspective. It's very modular. Subjects are taught in isolation. In Montessori, that doesn't happen. The teacher doesn't say, okay, we're going to sit down and do math now. She just merely gives a lesson. And usually there's a story tied to that lesson that ties it to something else.
Right.
So it's, you're getting not just maybe a history on the Pythagorean theorem, but you're getting some historical context around, this theory and how it was used by different people. And, then the children start to think, well, what can I use this for? And, and it's very implicit in the curriculum of Montessori is to weave this systems perspective of the world for the children. And that's where we're seeing disciplines move towards, right? So this is where, biology, like 30 years ago, was systems biology, looking at things as a system and looking at them in localized contextual ways too, not in just ways of like, oh, these universal laws occur and we just know a few variables and we can predict all these outcomes. And that still seems to be the perspective that we have in conventional education. So it's what we need is a huge shift, and we need to recognize that the grammar of schooling, as we all know it, that's not the way that school should be. Right. That just happened to be the way that it was designed when compulsory schooling came along, and superintendents were dealing with a very large immigrant population and all of this sort of stuff, right? It was just a very efficient way, and it was, in fact, influenced, by the Taylor efficiency of the time that was used in factories and that kind of thing. Right. And it's just like that. So, okay, that served its purpose. Okay. And a lot of people do really well in that environment. Yeah. But I also know a lot of people who do really, really well in school, mm-hmm. but they don't do as well in the real world. Right. Because the real world doesn't actually work the way that we've designed school.
Exactly.
So it just trying to get that shift to happen. And I feel like that for parents, even when they bring their children into a Montessori community, it's like they still have their lens of school, right? And maybe now when they bring their children in, just a little sliver of it is really Montessori, but the rest of it is still kind of conventional education. And they don't even necessarily realize that. And I'm not insulting them. This is, I think, the way perception shifts, tend to happen. It just, there are a lot of assumptions and beliefs that go unrecognized, right? But as you learn more, we're trying to shift that lens and make it more and more Montessori so that they can see why this works, instead of them comparing it to conventional education or looking at it through the lens of conventional education.
I totally agree. Even as a teacher, we're still coming in, we want to become a Montessori teacher specifically, but we're still coming in from our lens of conventional education, and it takes years to really go from reading what Montessori wrote and working with the materials and being with the children to actually fully do what it's required, following the child and using different ways of redirecting and discipline. And I mean, that even takes years just as an educator. So I can imagine parents needing even longer, especially if they're not getting many parent ed nights or opportunities to observe. I think it's very important for parents to go and observe in a classroom. And I know many schools will require at least a half an hour before enrolling a child, but then they don't necessarily get that afterwards. So I love that there's some new way to engage them. And I'd love to ask you, how, when you were doing parent education evenings, how do you get a big crowd? How do you get people to come and want to give their evening up to learn about what their children are doing in school? How did that work?
Yeah, that's always the big question, right? And trying to figure out when to do, when to schedule it so the most parents will come. And yeah, I don't know that I necessarily found out the answer to that. I did find, until we went dry as a school, wine seemed to help when we would offer snacks and some wine.
Right.
But
childcare when you're giving the lecture.
Yeah, but that was the other thing. You do have that issue. These are parents; they need to put their children to bed, and of course, I had done lots of workshops on sleep with my parent community because sleep is a huge issue.
Yeah.
And it's so important for brain development. And so it's like, I didn't, want to offer childcare at 6:30 for primary students, because honestly, they should be at home doing their, being close to their bedtime routine.
Right.
So it was really hard. But, and I think part of it is though, too, is that, and I think this is, I've met so many passionate Montessorians. I don't think it's difficult to do, but really to convey that passion to the parents when you're talking to them, because they really sense that, and it makes them feel excited. So even if it's just a passing conversation on the playground, it's not, you don't want to be, there's no need to, I'm not saying be over the top, but really just, share something that you saw their child do, or just, and isn't that amazing? And isn't, it's just that helps them, and then to be excited, and then to want to come to these kinds of educationals. But yeah, I mean, and unfortunately you tend to get like the same crowd, and you don't, and then people that you're like, oh, I wish this family was here, and then of course exactly. Not, and but that's also why you can do the white papers, and you can send something home with them, or email them to your parents, or even do the nice thing about the white papers too is that you can actually put together parent ed nights based on the papers. I mean, so long as you're citing them,
right,
that's not a problem, right? And then so if parents, like right now, actually, I'm putting together a talk on play in Montessori that I'm going to do at the Early Childhood Education Conference in Australia in a couple of weeks. And, the white paper has everything there. It has all of the research. It has everything. You can put together your own PowerPoint pictures of the children at your school. Right. Make it personal. But then for those who don't come, you can say, well, here's basically what we talked about. And then you can send it out to your community via email, So but we do have to be really proactive in educating them and inspiring them to want to come and to learn more.
I agree. I so agree. And I love that there's ways that we can engage. I also really think that because it's so hard to find the right time for parent education, it's important to find other ways of delivery. So yeah. I know that you're doing podcasts. Are the podcasts on your papers, on your research?
So the podcasts are really, they cover different topics, that some of which are covered by the white papers. So we did one, for instance, on trauma, really giving the science behind trauma and talking to a trauma expert. And then Dr. Jackie Constantino, who runs a National Center for Montessori in the public sector, she did a paper on, ways that we in Montessori handle trauma in the classroom. Also, I did one episode with Dr. Deborah Budding. We both we together wrote the paper on movement and cognition, which is a huge piece of Montessori that is really, I think, is so absolutely fundamental. And it's not just that, oh, you need to move so that you can touch things and then you can learn about these concepts and they become embodied. And I mean, that's true. But most fundamentally with Montessori, what is happening is that all of the materials, because they're so well designed and they're training movements either directly or indirectly, there's all this preparation that's going on. It's the sensory motor training ground. And in terms of how the brain actually develops, sensory motor development occurs first. And then from that, we get higher level thinking. From there, we get higher level thinking. And then we also get emotion regulation. And so as we're training the children, for lack of a better word, but as they're practicing actually, all of these movements on their own. Okay, so these are movements that they are choosing to engage in. And they're making all of these movements smooth and automatic. They're really building up this large repertoire of automatic movements that they can utilize that then frees up their attention for higher level thinking and creativity. And then the other thing that's happening is that the circuits that are involved in movement, those are the same circuits that underlie thinking and emotion regulation as well. So you're strengthening all of that's really how, at the most fundamental level, that Montessori is building executive functions. But we want to keep our children in Montessori for as long as possible, because those circuits underlying movement and thinking and emotion regulation, they continue to develop throughout adolescence. So we often talk about the frontal lobe, how that's developing through age 25. So it's developing through adolescence. Well, so are the other brain areas, the cerebellum and the basal ganglia, that are involved with the frontal lobe in these circuits, and they're developing over time. So that's probably one of my favorite podcasts is actually with Dr. Deborah Budding, where we talk about the vertical brain model, and really seeing the brain in this systemic way, and which means that education should really be operating from a born to move perspective rather than a born to think.
Yeah.
So we're very content thinking oriented generally. We love our higher level thinking, right? That distinguishes us from the rest of the animal kingdom and gives us this exceptionalism and all of that sort of stuff. But movement is attached to all of that, right? And so so you want the children practicing these movements and these very complex behavioral patterns for as long as possible. Definitely. And I'm talking about things, involved in self-care, these types of things. I had a parent once, I was doing a consultation with a parent who was concerned because his adolescent boy didn't know how to call and order a pizza for himself. Right. But the parents didn't realize is that they made all these accommodations so that the child didn't really have to engage in self-care and he could just focus on his academics. See, that's a thinking perspective, right? But that child is going to be an adult soon and go out into the world, and he's going to be away at college, and he's going to have to take care of himself while simultaneously getting his work done for school, right? So what a great thing to be able to have these complex movements in self-care automatized, so that while you're doing your laundry or you're cooking your meal, you can think about your term paper or whatever it is, right? Because all of these other complex behaviors are automatic. And so, right, and that's, so you can do those things and then engage in this higher level thinking. And that's what Montessori does. It just provides all of these very great opportunities to practice these very complex planning, action patterns. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, oftentimes when the children are choosing big works in math or language, when they finish that work, they go straight to a practical life activity. And it's kind of like their way of easing back in to think about the next project, just like you say. And I love that, because at home, that's essentially what we want our teenagers to work towards is, okay, even your 6, 7, 8 year old, they have things that they can do at the house. There's plenty of things that children can do to help. And I love picking up my son and seeing them with their after school, or they're almost at the end of the day chores or jobs that they call them, where they're going to the compost and they're taking out the trash and they're washing the dishes and they're doing all these things to help the whole environment. And that's essentially, as a parent, you want to see that at home. And I think also, for a parent to know that their children are capable of those things, that they can ask those things of them at home, is also very important, because then we stop doing those things for our children, because it doesn't really serve them if we're still making their lunches when they're 10 years old. No, they can make them themselves, and then they're part of the process of taking care of themselves and functioning as a community in the household. And then we would actually be supporting our Montessori education by continuing it at home. So I really believe that parents need to have more access to learning about this method. And I know that there was a parent session at the AMI refresher, but I don't know that there was many parents there. I know it's probably hard for them to get away for the weekend. It's expensive. So I love that there's podcasts and there's booklets, and I love that your research, it's all like a few pages long, so it's easy to give a copy to a parent to go and take a look at, give them something to read, give them something to watch on their own time, because it's so hard to find the right moment for parent education. It's in the daytime, you get your stay-at-home moms, but all the people that are working really hard in the day to pay for the education, they can't make it. If you do it in the evening, it compromises family time. It's so tricky to find that moment of catching the parent to teach them what you're so passionate about and to tell them what's so exciting in their child's day. But I think the more parents know about those things, about the secret of childhood, of what's happening in the class, the more they're going to trust the method, the more they're going to keep working hard to make sure their children can stay. Because sadly, Montessori education is expensive, and it's not accessible to all families.
We're working on that, though. Thankfully, that is our social justice component, is getting access to as many children as possible. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's still, and that's why it's perceived generally as, for higher social economic status children. It's also can be perceived by people in the disabled community as ableist for kind of similar sort of reasons, but it's not, it's not it is really for every child.
It really is.
So
I love that there's more Montessori in the public sector now. I was very impressed with, there's a great publication, Public Montessori. It's a newspaper that goes out to the schools. I think people can also, just as parents, go and subscribe if they're interested. And it was really nice to see the vendors area at the refresher course, just to see how many people are creative about sharing Montessori. I really liked your concept. There was another software that's called the Transparent Classroom, and it's showing the record keeping of the teachers, but so it's accessible to their parents. So they had something where it's not just saying, okay, we clicked off the pink tower and phonetic object box. They actually have a description of what those materials are. So when they send the record keeping to the parents to show what their children are doing, the parents can actually see what's going on and get more of a understanding of that. So I like where it's going. I think we need more and more sharing of Montessori concepts, as far spread as possible.
Yeah.
I'm excited about
one of the things, sorry to, don't mean to interrupt, that's one of the things when schools, when they subscribe to the Montessori Whitepapers, so that's $295 for an annual subscription. They have access to all the papers in a Word format or PDF format. And, what I tell the subscribers is, look, you can't put the papers up on a public web page, because then other schools can just use them, but, reprint them. I mean, put them in emails to the families. If you have a mom or maybe a dad who comes in and says, I belong to this parenting group and none of them know anything about Montessori, can I have a white paper to distribute to them? By all means, do that, right? Because I think, again, for me, it's, I can spend a lot of time worrying about whether or not people are stealing my intellectual property, but I think what I'm more interested in is people reading it,
Right.
right, and getting the information.
Exactly.
So use that. I mean, get your families excited and get them excited to help spread the word, because we're not going to get that paradigm shift that we want to see in the public sector. We're not going to get that grammar of schooling changed unless parents are demanding it.
Right.
So the more that we educate parents, the greater demand we can create. And that will cause at some point somebody to go, wait a minute, maybe schooling doesn't have to always be this way. Because the other thing is too, is that even though we're having more Montessori in public school districts, which is fantastic, I think every district is different. It depends on who the superintendent is. It depends on how much they know about Montessori, how supportive they are of it. But we don't want to have public Montessorians feel like that they are still trying to stuff Montessori somehow into this conventional framework in some way or another, whether it's via assessments or other things, So really, again, getting, helping that grammar of schooling to change for parents.
Right. And broadening your audience so that
Yeah.
more people think about that. So tell us, how do we find your Montessori white papers? Tell us what is your website?
So the website is whitepaperpress.us, and you can find all the podcasts there. There are some blog posts that are also free to the public, but if you become an individual subscriber for $4.95 a month, you're basically, all of the subscribers, whether it's a training center or a school or an individual, all of that supports all of the work that I do at White Paper Press. So it supports the creation of the white papers, it supports blog posts, it supports the podcasts, and I'd like to start to do other things as well. I'd like to do a series called Science Segments, of little videos about science and how that relates to learning, education, Montessori, and also to do some more stuff that's focused on parenting as well.
Fabulous.
So,
do schools ever have you come and give presentations?
oh yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's great. So I can, I can basically talk about any of the white papers, but I also have on my own website, which is laurafloreshaw.com. It has a list of talks that I have there that I've given, so at various places around the world. So yeah.
Nice. Well, I love what you're doing. Thank you for collaborating with Montessori Essentials.